Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, I'd like to introduce a widely recognized expert on gifted education and talent development as keynote speaker of the day. Over the past 30 years, she has created programs for all kinds of gifted learners and written extensively on issues of talent development, particularly on programming for underrepresented gifted students. She is active in national and state-level advocacy organizations for gifted children in the Midwest. She is past president of the National Association for Gifted Children, from whom she received 3 significant awards. She is currently the director of the Center for Talent Development at Northwestern University and a professor in the School of Education and Social Policy. One of her remarkable works is a monograph written with Rena Sobotnik and Frank Worrell, Rethinking Giftedness and Gifted Education, a proposed direction forward based on psychological science. Please welcome Professor Paula Olszewszki-Kubilius from School of Education and Social Policy, Northwestern University, Illinois.
Welcome everyone to this session. My name is Paula Olszewszki-Kubilius. I'm currently the director of the Center for Talent Development at Northwestern University, just north of Chicago, Illinois, in the US. And I'm also a professor in the School of Education and Social Policy here at Northwestern. So my talk today is on research-based models and practices for serving low-income gifted students. I'm going to broaden that topic a little bit to include other students who are typically underserved in our gifted services, which might include children from particular ethnic or racial groups or children who are twice exceptional. So one of my good friends, April Wells, who works in a school district, the largest school district in the state of Illinois, a very large one with hundreds of thousands of students and very diverse racially and social economically. One of her quotes that always stays with me is, "Gifted programs are only as equitable as students from the most marginalized backgrounds experience them to be." So the first question we have to ask ourselves is, who are the students who are missing from our gifted programs? It's important to identify which students are not being identified, which students are not being included in your program. And then to say, what can we do? And specifically, what do we need to understand and know so that we can do a better job with these students? So a central concept that's going to underlie almost everything I say is opportunity to learn. So Schmidt, Burrows, Zweidel, and Huang did a study, a cross-national study, using PISA data to study the relationship between the opportunity to learn in math, socioeconomic status, and math achievement. And what they found was that opportunity to learn was significantly and strongly related to socioeconomic status and actually accounted for 1/3 of the relationship between SES and math achievement. Interestingly, and though this part of the study was done in the US, they also found that there were greater differences in opportunity to learn in the US schools within schools compared to between schools, which is contrary to what you might expect. But essentially, half of the within-school relationship between SES and mathematics literacy was accounted for by differences in opportunities to learn that occurred within school, which implicated differences in the content and level of the curriculum, the quality of instruction, and the access of students to advanced and high-quality instruction. And this finding of differences within schools as well as between schools and opportunity to learn has been replicated in the reading area, at least at a local level in the US within a state. So what are the aspects of opportunity to learn that impact identification and talent development? Fewer advanced classes, fewer well-trained teachers or higher teacher turnover rate, limited financial resources from the family to supplement school learning with outside of school opportunities, less access within the family or the environment, the community to mentors, adult role models, or adult professionals, and growing income activity engagement gap. That is, as schools and communities charge for individuals to take part in programming, either extracurricular related to school or community-based, that will handicap families with fewer resources to spend on those kinds of activities. Another really fundamental issue to consider before we go further is this: what is it that you believe about the nature of giftedness? If you believe that it's an inborn trait that individuals are inherit, maybe genetically, but possess, then our job is to find the individuals who have it. However, if your view is that giftedness is a developmental process that starts in all domains with potential, and then with study and practice, effort, and the right opportunities can grow into competency and expertise and hopefully creative productivity in adulthood, then our job as gifted educators is to create contexts that bring out potential and that develop that ability and talent. So with respect to gifted identification, an essential question is who or what are we identifying? Are we identifying students, or are we identifying students for services? So we strive for an identification that's valid for the population that we are serving, which may differ from a population another school is serving, eliminates or avoids unwanted obstacles or gatekeepers, and is matched to the services that we're providing. Our view is that identification is program placement that is based on educational need, So I want to review the research on most of the typical practices employed in the field for identification, as well as some new ones that have more recent research on them, to give you information on what the research says, and also ways in which these can be used to provide more equitable identification to capture those students who are new language learners, culturally and linguistically diverse, who come from lower income families. So let's start with teacher referral. So teacher referral is often used at the screening level. That is, often we ask teachers to refer students who they think are gifted. And the research shows, however, that this doesn't work out so well in practice because teachers tend to be overly restrictive in their recommendations, tending to recommend compliant students, good students, missing students who may have advanced potential but aren't the best behaved, aren't always turning in their work, or are more creatively oriented than they are academically oriented. Teachers are better at discerning talent or exceptional ability in specific areas, such as reading or writing or math or science. So they do a better job when it's more specific rather than trying to identify general intellectual ability. And the research shows that teachers can vastly improve in the referral of students, missing fewer students, if we provide training on the characteristics of gifted students that challenges their stereotypes or beliefs, and training on multicultural manifestations of giftedness. So what do we do with teacher referral? Because on the one hand, we like to have teachers involved in the process, but on the other hand, we don't want this to become an obstacle for students. So one recommendation is to use teacher recommendations, but to use them only to add students at the screening level that might have been missed by some other screening procedure. So the bottom line on teacher nomination is, if you're going to use it, train teachers first, most importantly. Aim to cast a very wide net with screening, at least 20 to 30% of students. Seek nominations broadly from a variety of educational personnel who have contact with a student, who may see things that the classroom teacher doesn't see in a student, and constantly assess whether the nomination procedure is effective. Look at your data after using teacher nomination and see, are students being missed? Are students being recommended that aren't really good candidates for the services that you're providing? So it's a constant process of reviewing and revising your nomination procedures if you're going to use teacher referral. So let's talk about universal screening. This again is a procedure to use at the screening level. That is to identify students that we want to assess further, that we want to gather more information on. And so the idea here is to eliminate the gatekeeping obstacle that can exist when using teachers alone or using some kind of rating scale, and universally screen. That is, use some measure that you look at all students in a grade, for example, and to see how they stack up using that measure. So you're looking at all students' academic performance in some way and achievement to find high potential students. And you do this regularly, not just once. So you can use any local valid assessment. It could be an end of the year assessment from the previous grade. It could be an assessment to determine where students are in terms of mastery of the grade level concepts that are going to be taught. It could be a standardized achievement test. It could be a portfolio, but any local valid assessment. And you still, however, because we're at the screening level, need to use a generous cutoff. So for example, use a 110 or 115 on an IQ measure instead of the usual 120, 130. And then these are the students that you want to assess further. The advantage to universal screening is that it forces the school system to look at every student, not just students who are referred by teachers or nominated. And this can be helpful, not just for those students with high abilities, but also students who may be floundering and need more assistance. Another strategy that's been promoted recently and been researched is the use of local norms. So this strategy with identification, underlying it is an important principle that giftedness is defined in relation to an appropriate reference group. So let's go back to the opportunity to learn. If you're working in a school that has a lot of children that come from a lower SES level, lower income families who have had fewer opportunities to learn in their early years because they perhaps didn't attend preschool or kindergarten, or didn't have access to community programs, or didn't have resources in the home that fostered learning. How do you discern potential? Because the opportunity to learn will necessarily affect their level of achievement. And it will be different than students who come from more advantaged backgrounds who have had a lot of early education, opportunities to delve into all sorts of subject areas, either because of parental teaching or exposure, participation in community programs. So how do we discern potential in two very different populations that have had very different opportunities to learn? Well, what we do is we compare students to other students with similar opportunities to learn. So instead of, for example, requiring students to all qualify for a gifted program by being at the 95th percentile on some national test, we look at the students of the school and we look for those students who are demonstrating higher levels of potential compared to other students, even if that level of achievement is not as high as we would use in another school. So for example, we might select students who are achieving at a 75th percentile if the average level of achievement is at the 50th percentile in a school. So we select our highest achievers compared to other students who have had similar backgrounds, similar opportunities to learn. The research on this, done by Scott Peters and others, shows that diversity is definitely increased most when this is done within the school. In other words, in every school, we identify our highest achievers, and we select those students because they are most qualified to receive additional kinds of services, i.e. more advanced curriculum, access to more rigorous higher level courses. So the concept is that every school has learners who need gifted services, but the absolute level of their achievement from one school to the next may differ. So students are selected who need a more advanced curriculum within their school. It broadens the range of students receiving gifted services. It gives these higher achieving students contact with their intellectual peers within their school. Some might push back on varied standards for different groups of students or varying standards across different schools. This is a political issue. You also need to be careful about identifying the goal of the program. Is your goal to push those students through opportunities to meet more national level standards so that they qualify for other rigorous programs that require them? So the recommendation here is that local norms are most effective for young students in the early primary grades and through middle school, because it identifies students who need advanced services with the goal of preparing them to meet more national level benchmarks for later services. Generous cut scores, we already talked about this, but generous cut scores at the screening level of 20 to 30%. And different cut scores for groups differing in opportunity to learn, with the caveat that when we use different cut scores for different groups of students, we end up with heterogeneous groups of students with different educational needs. And programming has to take those needs into account. In schools that have a population of students who come from higher income families and students who come from lower income families, this is going to require different programs for those students who are the higher achievers in those groups. That means we move from a perception of offering a gifted program to offering gifted services. So every school would have several different types of services depending on the needs of the students that they're serving. The or rather than the and rule. Most gifted programs use multiple criteria to identify students. And that's a good practice because we want to capture as many students as possible. And we know that students may show their performance on one type of assessment more than another. Maybe students get really high grades. Maybe other students don't get such high grades, but they do really well on tests. Maybe other students don't necessarily get high grades, but when you give them a project, they do excellent work. So what do we do with these multiple criteria? How to use them most effectively? Kind of depends on the program and what you're trying to do. If multiple criteria are used, allow students to qualify on the basis of either rather than all of them. This can definitely broaden the numbers of students that you're serving. And this is most appropriate, I would say, for younger students, programs for younger students, and also for enrichment programs. On the other hand, if your program is for older students or students who are highly advanced, meaning it's a very accelerated program where students have to have evidence of high cognitive ability as well as high achievement, use the and criteria. For example, in our summer program at the center, we will offer what we call fast-paced classes, where we condense a whole year of a high school course into 3 weeks. We use multiple criteria with an and in order to make sure we're selecting students that will be successful in that program. But we run other programs that are for younger students. They are very enrichment oriented, and we allow students to come in on multiple criteria, having to meet only one of them. Different criteria for different stages of talent development. So if we accept a more of a talent development perspective on giftedness, that is that students learn over time and they gain knowledge and skills as they have opportunities, and they also gain important psychosocial skills like growth mindsets, a willingness to work on the edges of their competency, perseverance, as well as things like study skills. then that necessarily requires that we have more latitude with respect to achievement for younger students who are at the beginning stages of their talent development trajectory than for older students. So for example, for younger students, we would have more openness to students who lack motivation, don't always complete assignments, who have inconsistent work quality in school, with the idea that these are skills that we can develop with appropriate opportunities. And so we have more latitude for students not having all of those things in place. However, as students grow and develop, we may need to require some of those things to be in place in order to place them in more advanced and rigorous kinds of programming and have them be successful. So at the high school level, for example, for a specialized STEM school, we might want to pick students or have selection criteria include evidence of work quality or being organized or having study skills. So our selection criteria or identification criteria need to be matched to the stage of talent development. And then we need to have openness to culturally specific indications of talent. So this will vary, of course, by the groups of students that are in your country and who you are dealing with and who are not well represented in your gifted programs. For example, there are always going to be students who are new to the country and are learning the language. So how do we discern talent among those students? There are sometimes tests available in students' native languages that can be helpful, but oftentimes those are few and far between. However, we can look for other things. We can look for example, indications of rapid acquisition of the new language or rapid learning in areas like mathematics. We also have to be open to the fact that different cultures value different aspects of ability. And we need to be looking for talent that matches cultural expectations and what children have been exposed to. So for example, verbal talent in some cultural groups may be better discerned by looking at what students do in terms of oral storytelling or verbal presentations rather than in writing skills or reading comprehension. This, of course, requires teachers having training in these aspects of students' culture so that they can do a better job of looking for culturally specific manifestations of talent that would be otherwise missed. Okay, so the bottom line here is that we need to grow giftedness and need to have more latitude at younger stages and with younger children for skills that are not quite developed, for potential that doesn't manifest necessarily in high achievement yet, and for psychosocial skills that are underdeveloped, with the idea that through our programming that's challenging and appropriately matched to students' talent areas and at the level of their ability, we develop these skills over time. Okay, so let's talk about program models. When I was president of the National Association for Gifted Children, I was fortunate to receive some funding from the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation to bring together people who were working on intervention programs designed to help students from low-income backgrounds achieve at levels, higher levels than their opportunities might have provided. And so we brought together all sorts of programs. Some of these programs were focused on middle school students with the idea of getting them into advanced programs in high school. Some were focused on middle and high school students with the idea of getting them into more selective institutions of higher education. So but they all worked with lower income students. And we brought them together and shared information on what works. And across these various programs, these were some of the features that we found in common. Intervene early at school start. Research shows us that children from lower income families come to school already behind in their reading, behind in their mathematical literacy, and even behind in their knowledge of the natural world. Many of these programs reversed our typical approach to gifted education of identify and then serve, provide programming, to serve, then assess. That is, they offered opportunities for children to catch up, to show what they knew. They augmented what they were getting in school with the hopes of beefing up children's skills, increasing their opportunities to gain knowledge, and live up to their potential, and then later assess them to find out where they were, what progress they were making, and what they needed further. They increased learning opportunities significantly, both within school. They increased access to higher level courses with a lot of scaffolding for students to be successful, but they also increased learning time by offering programming through school breaks, weekends, and summers. They developed an array of services for students at different levels, not a program. So that would include involving families. It included help with students on psychosocial areas, bringing students together to offer social support. So they were looking holistically at children, not just their academic achievement. And they provided multiple entry points to advanced programming. So in many gifted programs, if you don't qualify at the elementary level, you don't have another chance. And these programs provided on-ramps at later levels of schooling, at middle school and even high school, secondary level. And also they created continuous pathways so that when students started in a program, they recognized the importance of continuing their support through their entrance into higher education. So I want to give you a few examples of interventions that I've had a lot of experience with, which illustrate some of these best practices that I've discussed. So this is a program, Project Excite, that I ran for 14 years in our local school district around the city, just north of the city of Chicago, in a very diverse, socioeconomically and racially diverse school district. This was at Evanston Township High School. And so this is a high school from grades 9 through 12. And you can see the breakdown, the racial ethnic breakdown of the students. And you can also see the racial ethnic breakdown of the students in the advanced placement program, which is some of the most advanced courses the school offered, and in their honors courses. And you can see the disparity. So that was the problem. That was the problem, that we had very unequal representation of African American and Latinx students in these more advanced classes. So we started Project Excite, and we started early. We started with second graders because we knew the problem was the preparation prior to getting into high school. So we used universal screening. We invited all second graders in the 5 schools we were working with to come and test. We didn't do any kind of screening process. We invited anyone who was interested to and encourage students to do so, to come and take a series of standardized tests. We used multiple measures, so a nonverbal reasoning test and an achievement test, and we used an or rather than an and criteria. We used a generous cutoff score. So we looked for students who were at the 75th percentile or above on either assessment. This was also using local norms. If we had relied on a national norm of the 95th percentile, we would have had very few students qualify for our program. Again, these were low-income students, primarily African American and Latinx. But we used a cut score of the 75th percentile because these were the highest scored students compared to other students from the same backgrounds and schools. And then we provided over 400 hours of outside of school supplemental learning opportunities from grades 2 through 8, which included weekends, included after school, and included summer opportunities, as well as working intensely with their families. So this shows you the students' reading and math achievement. And the black line shows the students from Project Excite. These were standardized tests that the district used, nationally normed standardized tests. And we can see that the Excite students started in math and reading achievement well below the highest scoring students in the district, the white students. But by grade 6 or 7, they caught up to them. with the help of this intervention. So basically the intervention with outside school instruction and supplemental instruction helped those students catch up to the highest scoring students in the district. Here's another example. This is Project Occam's, which I've been working on for the last 5 years. That Occam stands for Online Curriculum Consortium for Accelerating Middle School Students. So in this project, we are working with a very diverse school district in Columbus, Ohio, and we are working with low-income students in 6th grade. Now, in the state of Ohio, they have a statewide criteria for gifted services. You have to be at the 95th percentile on an achievement test, a nationally standardized achievement test or cognitive ability test in order to qualify for gifted services, which necessarily results in underrepresentation of low-income and minority students in their gifted programs. So we wanted to create an on-ramp at middle school for students to qualify for gifted services. So we identified potential as a test score in language arts sometime in the past, prior to grade 6, at the 85th to the 94th percentile. So under the criteria for gifted services, but close to it. Again, we used local norms. And we identified these students and offered them an accelerated hybrid curriculum. It was delivered online as well as face-to-face with support from their classroom teachers. And it compacted the 7th through 9th grade language arts curriculum into 2 years. So students did 3 years of language arts curriculum in 2 years in their 7th and 8th grade year, because our goal was to enable these students to accelerate upon entry into secondary school so that they could enter at an advanced level and have more opportunity to do advanced placement courses or the most advanced English language arts courses at their high school in their 9th or their 11th and 12th grade year. So this was a program that created an on-ramp for gifted programming for students who were currently left out of gifted services, but created an on-ramp in middle school by using local norms and multiple pathways. So this demonstrates the achievement. In the state of Ohio, students are required to take an exam at the end of their 9th grade year in their English language arts to see where they are and to assess their progress. Our students took that test at the end of their 8th grade year because we had compacted the curriculum into 2 years. So this is their performance compared to the district overall. So this is the 8th grade, our Occam's 8th grade students' performance compared to 9th graders' performance in the district overall, and compared to the 9th graders in the highest performing high school in the district. And you can see that the Occam students did extremely well on this exam that they took 1 year earlier than is typical. And this shows their growth. These are their reading gain scores. The Occam students are the purple line. It shows the tremendous growth from 7th to 9th grade for these students compared to what you would expect based on national norms. Again, as a result of this compacted hybrid curriculum that was a key component of the intervention. And this is my final example, the Young Scholars Program. This is a program that's been around for quite a while, started by Carol Horn, and it's been implemented in Fairfax County, Virginia. Fairfax County is a very, very large district, many, many schools. And the schools are very diverse. Some of them serve a lot of professionals who work in Washington, D.C., because it's right next to Washington, D.C., and others serve a largely low-income population of students. And there was a great disparity in the percentages of low-income students who were qualifying for district-level gifted programs, special schools, special classes, and even the specialized STEM high school that drew on students from the district. So that was the problem that they were confronting. So this is a model that was developed and that schools in the district adopt. They're not required to implement it, but they have the option of adopting it. So the model works like this. they turn around the idea of identify and then assess to, of identify and then to serve and then identify. So they intervene early in the primary years. And teachers regular classroom teachers work with the gifted coordinators and gifted specialists to develop challenging lessons to give to all students, all students. And some of these are drawn from curricula, like from the Center for Gifted Studies at the College of William and Mary, or from Vanderbilt University, that are developed specifically for gifted students, such as Jacob's Ladder. And some the teachers develop themselves. But the idea is they offer these challenging lessons to all students. And then teachers are trained as talent scouts. So they're trained to notice students who are exhibiting higher level thinking, problem-solving abilities, interest and motivation, and persistence. And then those students are actually marked as young scholars and given continuing opportunities for enrichment in their early years via cluster grouping of those students within elementary classrooms. So teachers are trained as talent scouts, and students get increased opportunities to have exposure to challenging lessons. In addition, students are given, young scholars participate in summer programs and school break programs, again, augmenting their learning opportunities. This is a program that requires involvement of teachers, all school personnel, and definitely a strong commitment by the administration. And the goal here is to identify these young scholars based on local norms, with the goal of increasing their learning, their knowledge, their skills, so that they can qualify on the basis of district level norms for other district-based programs. It requires a level of service approach to programming. So for example, within this district, they have thought about what they can offer at every level of schooling. So everybody gets exposed to critical and creative thinking strategies. There are differentiated lessons for students in K-6, part-time academic program for students in grades 3 to 6. And then in middle school, there are honors classes and the International Baccalaureate program for middle school students. And in high school, there are honors classes, advanced placement, international baccalaureate, dual enrollment, and a specialized school. The concept illustrated here is that there's levels of service for students. Some may only need some enrichment, and some may need more accelerated advanced programs at the district level that the district runs. There's levels of service and there's continuous programming that's articulated across the early grades, the middle grades, and the high school grades. This program has been very successful in diversifying the numbers of students receiving gifted services, diversity in terms of social economic status, diversity in terms of cultural and linguistic diversity of the students, and increasing more diversity in terms of students staying on the pathway from early elementary to high school in terms of qualifying for gifted services. There's a book coming out about this program from Prof Press. It should be out probably by summer. So I want to end with this. Typically in our approach to gifted education, our model has been identify and then serve. And so if we were going to illustrate that with something like this graphic, it would have just 2 columns. This is a very much expanded model that I think is very useful for all of us who are working to diversify our gifted programs and to serve more students. This came out of the National Center for Research on Gifted Education at the University of Connecticut. And so it starts out with the pre-identification stage. And this is the stage at which we identify children with potential. We call them emergent scholars. And it's at this point that we're defining how we work with students depending on our student population. We provide those students with preparation. This is to provide opportunities for talent to emerge and to be seen. Most often it consists of enrichment opportunities. So we start with potential and we provide enrichment. And only then, when students have had increased opportunities to learn so that they can catch up with their skills and they can demonstrate what they're capable of, do we engage in any kind of formal identification, which could include, again, all best practices of multiple measures, local norms, measures that are appropriate for our population, followed by the appropriate interventions, which include all the best practices we know about for gifted education, such as subject area acceleration, enrichment units, cluster grouping, all sorts of culturally responsive teaching and learning, and ultimately with the goal of helping more students get on this path of talent development, regardless of their backgrounds, demographics, or their prior experiences. So I think this definitely illustrates how we augment our role as gifted educators from identify to serve to preparing students to be assessed, particularly students who come from lower income backgrounds. So you'll stop there. I do want to say that with this PowerPoint, I have more slides that I knew I wouldn't be able to get to that deal more specifically with curriculum and some other aspects of gifted development, such as psychosocial skills, that I will share with you, even if I didn't cover them. And also at the end, I have listed on the slides the research articles that support the best practices that I talked about and or go into more detail about the program models that I also talked about so that you can get them and read them on your own. Thank you.